So a few years ago, three things were bugging me. First is that public health problems and healthcare management problems, which is my area of expertise, are wicked. They're ill-structured, they're messy. And what that means is that there's no simple solution to getting answers to these problems. There's never a definitive solution. There are conflicting values. There's missing information. And what this means is that these problems require a shift from thinking in terms of right and wrong answers to thinking about better and worse approaches to addressing these problems and getting solutions. And what that means is you need to have a more greater tolerance for ambiguity. You need to look at different trade-offs that you have to make and draw on the evidence from different sources to try to make the best decisions that you can and be flexible knowing that those decisions may have to change moving forward. Many of you are familiar with these kinds of messy problems. The healthcare epidemic, whether it's opioid epidemic or health disparities, are examples of this. In my own world, strategic hires as an example of this, as is organizational change and quality improvement. And the question I was asking myself, the reason this was bugging me was, what am I doing to make my students start thinking in these ways, solving problems in these ways, but on a manageable scale, something we can do in the classroom? The second problem that was bugging me was case studies. Now, case studies have got a venerable tradition in medicine, and they're actually pretty good at dealing with messy problems. But the problem with the cases I was finding in my domain was that some of them were dated, some of them didn't really focus on exactly the themes and topics we were covering in class. Some of them didn't address the diversity of the careers my students wanted to do. And they were also a little bit sort of fake in the sense that they didn't address some of the important intangibles that I want my students to start considering in addressing the problems that they face. Intangibles like difficult personalities when you're trying to get change done, or the culture and how to change that culture. These are things that you can't really capture very easily in 30 pages. The third thing that was bugging me was guest speakers. Not the guest speakers themselves, of course, but I'm a cognitive and organizational psychologist, and I'm always thinking about thinking. I study expertise, and I found that even the guest speakers in a lot of classes, they come in, they tell a compelling story. Most of the students are engaged, and they leave better informed. They've learned something. But a lot of our guest speakers, a lot of our part-time faculty have 10, 15, 20 years of experience. And a lot of what they leave with from that classroom is basically untapped. I wanted to figure out a way to not just have these guest speakers share their experiences, but their expertise. What do I mean by expertise? Expertise is their knowledge, their opinions, but more than that, the way they think and solve these wicked, ill-structured, and messy problems. So I was having lunch with a guest speaker, these three things bugging me, and this guest speaker was talking about the kinds of problems he was solving in the field. He was an alum. And he was telling me stories that he was going to share with the class and how, why they were challenging. And it struck me, why can't we have these real problems that this guest speaker has actually addressed turned into short case studies and that are delivered by the guest speaker? So this is how it works. The goals that we sort of set out were, let's try to get these short, authentic, flexible decision problems that the guest speakers actually addressed in his or her experiences, model how that guest speaker actually thought through these problems. What did they pay attention to? What did they ignore? What trade-offs did they anticipate? How did they generate their options? How did they evaluate their options? And then actually get students to engage in that kind of thinking with feedback from that guest speaker. So here's how it works. First thing you do, this is not something, in my experience, that every guest speaker is comfortable doing. So you need to find guest speakers who are able to improvise, who are flexible, who can take a bit of coaching from me or you, and who have maybe a bit of Socratic flair. So they have a tendency or comfort with asking students questions and not just presenting. You get them to think of 2 or 3 or 4 stories, thematically linked, and then you present them with some course concepts. If my case, it would be things like organizational learning, organizational culture, leadership, teams, conflict resolution. These are the course concepts that I teach. And I wanted the guest speaker to have a sense of what the students already know and what they've seen, and to be able to weave these concepts or pull these concepts out of the stories that they're telling. So they prepare, and they give the first case, the first scenario, the first problem they dealt with, and they're thinking aloud. So think aloud is a protocol, is a type of strategy that goes back to 1982, where as the speaker is not just describing what they're doing, but they're describing what they were thinking while they were making those decisions, while they were solving those problems, while they were addressing the conflicts inherent in these wicked, messy, ill-structured problems. So the students are getting a little bit more than just a story. They're getting the why behind the story. Second round, another case, thematically linked. More think aloud. This time, the students are asked a question. They're asked to make a choice. Here's the story so far. Now you've got to choose. Will you do A? Will you do B? And why? It's not just the answer, it's the rationale that's important. Students huddle in their groups. They've got 4 or 5 minutes to talk, and they need to come up with an answer and a rationale. Then there's feedback. So they give their answer, they give their rationale, other students react. The guest speaker gives his or her feedback. Again, there's no right or wrong answers. There's just nuances and things they may not have considered in their rationale, so they're learning how to think. Next wave, case 3. You'll notice probably that these are getting a little bit darker. There's a rationale behind this as well. So there's more think aloud. This time, we've given them a simple choice. Let's up the ante. Multiple choices. Now you've got 4 options. Again, which option do you choose? Confer it with your group and tell us why. What were you considering when you made that decision? And this gives, again, the guest speaker an option, the opportunity rather, to identify things that they were not considering that may have influenced their thinking or should have influenced their thinking. What's interesting at this point, we've gone through a couple of rounds where students have had to answer questions and make difficult decisions, and make decisions that are outside of their comfort zone, potentially in their fear zone, because there are no right or wrong answers, but that doesn't mean every answer is acceptable. And what's palpable in the classroom is that once they've gone through 2 rounds of this, their level of engagement changes completely. They are now, in the 3rd round, or the 4th round, they're starting to ask the professor, or not the professor, rather the guest speaker, questions about the case, details about the case. Now, I tell them at the beginning of the class, you can stop and interrupt and ask clarifying questions about these cases at any time. And they do a little bit. But once they've gone through this twice, now they're engaged. Now they know they have a problem to solve. Now they're sensitive to the kinds of things that they should be asking about. The guest speaker can't present all the details. That's just impossible. So it's now the student's responsibility to pull out the relevant details, and that'll inform their next round of thinking. Now we've gotten a simple choice. We've given them multiple choices to make. And this is where the kicker comes in, open-ended choice. What's an open-ended choice? This can be a number of things. Here's the situation. This is what you know so far. What do you do next? Or what are the top 3 things you need to do to be able to approach this problem? What are the most important pieces of information? And again, there's feedback. So you've seen what the guest speaker's doing. You've seen what the students are doing. What am I doing? Where am I in this? I'm everywhere. Everywhere. And that's important because this is really not just throwing the guest speaker out there. Here are some of the things I do besides the prep. Thinking aloud, not easy to do, not easy to keep up, because we naturally shift back into storytelling. Second thing is, so I keep them on track. I ask them, what are you thinking? What are you doing? What was going through your mind? When the students are conferring in their groups and they're doing their decision making, I huddle with that guest speaker and I see how things are going, maybe take things in certain directions, and emphasize other things. And then during the feedback sessions, I sometimes jump in and try to weave in additional course concepts and ways of thinking and helping them make connections. So the 3 things you see is there's thinking of the actual guest speaker, you see thinking in the students, and then collectively there's feedback on that thinking. So the 3 things that used to bug me don't really bug me as much anymore, because the dynamic case study actually addresses authentic, messy problems. It actually gets them put into short, scaffolded, so they become increasingly more difficult, but open-ended exercises where students are encouraged to ask questions, not just problem solving, but problem finding. And finally, we get our guest speakers to engage much more than they normally would with just giving stories. They're actually sharing their thinking and helping our new generation of students think through these difficult problems. Thank you.